Yes, Sachin. After reading 5.1, the problem of defining deconstruction, I have several doubts. Say, for instance, why is it difficult to define deconstruction? Secondly, the question comes is like, why is it not a negative term? And the third point is like, how does deconstruction happen on its own? I would request you to elaborate a bit on this.
Thank you, Dilip. It's a very pertinent and important question, and often students are at loss when they try to grapple with the definition of term deconstruction. One very important question which Derrida is asking throughout his entire career is whether it is possible to define something once and for all, rigorously, and whether and what are its limits. To what extent can you define something? So that becomes a kind of basic question which Derrida is asking. And keeping that in mind, the term that he uses, deconstruction, he refuses to define it, saying that like all other terms that we use in philosophy or literary criticism for that matter, even deconstruction cannot be once and for all finally defined. Right? And students and scholars often want something that is clear cut and defined for their use.
Yes.
And so Derrida becomes very difficult philosopher to read. So that is one reason why deconstruction is a very difficult idea
To define. Yes. So why is it a negative term?
Yeah.
Why is it exactly not a negative term?
Right. Because Derrida says that it's not a destructive activity. It's not something breaking down something for sake of destruction. But what Derrida is doing is inquiring into the condition or what causes a philosophical system to stand up on its feet and fall down. So what are the conditions which make a philosophical or intellectual system possible? So he is inquiring into the foundations and is also inquiring into the condition of why something cannot be defined or a system cannot be finally closed off. So he says that the deconstruction is not a destructive activity but an inquiry into the foundations, causes of intellectual systems. So that is one reason why it's not a negative operation. But there is also the point that he makes that he wants to transform the way people think. Right? So entire structure of Western thought has to be transformed is what Derrida wants to emphasize. And he takes this from Heidegger's project of destruction, which he wants to translate into French from German. And that is what he is explaining in the famous letter to a Japanese friend. His Japanese friend was a professor who wanted to translate French text of Derrida into Japanese. And so he wants to know how to translate deconstruction.
Yes, and that is what we are going to read in the next subsection of the same unit.
Right.
So the point that comes is like, how does deconstruction happen on its own?
Right. So once you consider that it's not a destruction, but an inquiry into the limits of a philosophical system, its coherence, then we see that the conditions which produce a philosophical system are the same conditions which are putting a limit to it. Now all this is very abstract, and that is one reason why students will have great difficulty in understanding this. But the very condition, Derrida argues, which produces an intellectual system which is based on distinctions or binary oppositions, as we will see in our next units, is the same condition is responsible for undoing those oppositions. Right, and the term that he uses for this condition is difference, as we speak in French. But it is not spelled. It's not spelled differently in French, but in English, you have to show the difference. Right. So we'll look into that when we look into the unit of difference.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
So after reading 5.2.2, that is Derrida and Saussure, I have several doubts in my mind. How does Derrida deconstruct the idea of arbitrariness? And when I read more, I came to the point what is this metaphysics of presence? So in the earlier video, I have seen that you are talking something about logocentrism and phonocentrism.
Right.
So in this connection, I would like to know more on those concepts as well as metaphysics of presence also.
Right. So, yeah, the idea that is very important in Ferdinand Saussure's writing is that the relationship between word and its meaning is not natural,
Okay.
but it's a conventional one. For example, the word sister has no natural relationship with the person, human being, but it's just a convention that connects the word sister with the person.
Okay.
So that is what he implies by arbitrariness. Means any word can be used to talk about anything technically, but what connects a word with its meaning or a signal with its meaning is the convention, and convention is always social, and it is always by consensus that word and meaning gets connected. Now what Derrida reads into this, and he deconstructs this idea further by saying that meaning of a word is usually thought of as something in our mind in Saussure, but Derrida points out that meaning of the word is nothing but another word. I will show you in the next unit in 5.3 what he means when I'm talking about difference, and how does he prove his point. That is what we'll see next. But the question that you asked about metaphysics of presence is a very pertinent one, and the question of logocentrism and phonocentrism. Metaphysics of presence is again a term that is taken from Heidegger, and that is another, you can see, a connecting link between Heidegger and Derrida. What Heidegger pointed out by metaphysics of presence is that when we consider being of something, like being of this table, right, we often connect it with its presence. We associate being of something with its presence, and this bias is one of the things which Heidegger is questioning: association of a being with its presence. So if you look at language, then we use was, is, something is, right? So if you want to say something exists, then you say something is.
Okay.
Right? For example, this table is. So that is a proof of its existence. The table is. So the presence is the present tense that we often find in language. So Heidegger is saying that we seem to connect presence and as a proof of its existence, as mode of its being. And that is what he wants to question in his book called Being and Time.
Okay.
Now what happens in Derrida is, Derrida says that Western philosophy is again built on the differences, binary oppositions. Just like human language is built upon differences, as Saussure point out. If you want to know what is P, then you should know what is T.
Okay.
If you want to know what is S, then you should have S is something which is not Z.
Okay.
Right, so we recognize elements of language by contrasting it. So Saussure says there are no positive elements in language, but only negative ones. So presence of something can only be understood as absence of something else, and that bias is built into Western philosophy. So what is a woman? Woman is seen as absence of manliness.
Okay.
So she is considered to be secondary or inferior or derived. What is darkness? But darkness is absence of light.
Exactly.
Right? So there is a tendency to privilege or consider something which is present as superior.
Okay.
And the other term in the binary is seen as inferior or derivative.
Okay.
For example, good versus evil as a binary opposition. Then evil is seen as something which lacks goodness.
Goodness. Yeah.
And what is good? Good is something which is lacks evil, right? So this absence is seen as a inferior sign of inferiority or negativity or marginality. So that bias makes the binary oppositions very lopsided. Means in language, man and woman are supposed to be equal linguistically, but it's socially you see that man is privileged. Right? So this privileging of what you think to be present is what he calls as logocentrism. And logocentrism is a manifestation of metaphysics of presence. Because man is seen as having full presence. And Derrida also points out why is man privileged is because he has male sexual organ, phallus. So he combines phonocentrism, which is emphasis on speech as true expression of language, and he uses word called phallogocentrism, which is a combination of phallus, that is male sexual organ, which is privileged in society. So woman is seen as somebody who doesn't have male sexual, and that's why inferior. Right? So Derrida is actually critiquing social system, and this social system is because of the way language is used. So the biases are built, encoded into language, and that is what he means by logocentrism and metaphysics of presence. Right.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
So dear learners, in 5.3 difference, you have studied about the Derridian concept of difference. It is indeed very difficult to understand this concept which does not have audible difference, and thus it becomes very difficult to understand. I would request Dr. Sachin Katkar to elaborate more on this concept of difference.
Yeah, thank you, Dilip. It's a real tough question, but I would like to simplify it by drawing your attention to a very common activity that most of us are familiar with. That is referring to a dictionary. Right. So, for example, you open a dictionary to consult a word. Let's say, for example, that word is word interest, a very common word. And you open the dictionary and you look at the dictionary and you see that the word interest is written, and just along with it is given its meaning. Now, if you look at what is meaning, so I open this and I want to know the meaning of the word interest. Then what does the dictionary say? Dictionary says interest is a noun, which means wanting to know more. Attraction, that's the another meaning of. Third meaning that it gives is hobby. Fourth meaning that it gives is money. The fifth meaning that it gives is advantage. Then it also says share in business is also interest. Then it says connection is also interest. Then interest also means group of people. Right? So what I came to know is that word interest has this meaning and I understand it. Right? So what Derrida is questioning here is what do you mean by understand? And he draws attention to the fact that what we look in dictionary and what we find is not its meaning but a group of another words. For example, word interest means hobby or group of people or share in business. So these are words like the word interest. So the meaning of one word is set of another words. Right? And we feel that we have understood. But the question is, if meaning of word like interest is a group of another words, then what is the meaning of those words? Right? For example, share in finance or economic or in money. Then what do you mean by finance? Then I go to another page looking for the meaning of the word finance. Then finance would be explained as something else. But this explanation is nothing but a group of words. So what happens is that there is no final meaning to any word. We find that one word leads to another word, and that word leads to another word, and that leads to another word, and finally we never come out of the dictionary. If we stop, it's because of an illusion that we have understood. Right? So Saussurian idea that meaning is something that is in the mind is what he challenges here. He seems to imply that the meaning of one signifier is not one signified but another signifier, which leads to another signifier, and till infinite, right? It never stops. So this is the chain of significations of signifiers. This is the chain of signifiers which never stops. Now this is not how we look at meaning and dictionary, right? But Derrida is drawing attention to the fact that we take for granted, we assume that we have understood thing, while what we have actually done is we have stopped asking the question, what is the meaning of this word? For example, if interest implies share in money, then what do you mean by word share? What do you mean by word money, for example? Then I go to a dictionary and look for word money. That would lead me to something else, right? So meaning is always postponed, the ultimate meaning. It's never there. It's always promised and postponed. So there is one tendency in language to defer continuously the meaning. But we remain under impression that we have found the meaning, while it is just postponed. Right? So ultimate and final meaning is a myth, according to Derrida. And you can never ever reach the ultimate or final meaning. Right? So that is one word, one sense of deferring which Derrida is implying. The other sense is the sense of the word difference as differentiating. How do we know something is black? It's only again when we contrast it with something which is not black that we know that this is black. Right? So Saussure has said that there are no positive items in language. Right? There are only negative ones. So there are only differences, according to Saussure. So Derrida combines two terms, differ and defer, because in French one word is used to imply both, and that is to differer. Right? And so it's a pun. It means to differ, it also means to differentiate. So postpone and differentiate, only one word is used to signify both, postpone and differentiate or distinguish. Right? So it is a pun actually in French. So word difference is a pun in French. And another very interesting thing is that you can never pronounce it differently. You can only spell it differently. Right? With difference with A and difference with E. So what Derrida is drawing attention is the difference between speech and writing. And he is questioning this privileging of speaking, even in coining a new word. So this new term is very cleverly designed. It almost encompasses everything that he wants to say, to combine difference and speech and writing. Right? That's why what happens that we can never hear difference. We can only read difference. Right? And that is one reason why he uses word difference with A there. And if you type it in your Word, MS Word, then it will show a red line because difference is spelled with E. So that is one reason why students have difficulties in understanding difference. Now what is this difference with A? Now as we are speaking, let us use a French pronunciation to signify difference with A. So difference. Right. So what does difference imply? Then Derrida says difference implies a force. Difference is not a idea or a concept, but a force which makes differentiation possible, which makes postponing possible. And because there is differentiation is made possible by difference, we can have any sort of communication, right? So meaning, even the communication that we are having right now is made possible by difference, because we are distinguishing between words. When you listen to what I say and when I speak. So we are, in our mind, there is differentiation going on. But at the same time, what is the meaning of that we are communicating? We think that we have understood, but what actually happens that is only postponed. The ultimate final meaning of what we are discussing right now can never be grasped. But throughout the Western philosophy, there is a tendency to assume that the final meaning can be grasped. Right? And that final meaning is what he calls transcendental signified. Transcendental, that which is outside or beyond language, which can be grasped. Now, the whole assumption of transcendental signified is what Derrida says is the symptom of metaphysics of presence. So what difference does is that it undoes metaphysics of presence. But at the same time, it's not a negative term, because the contrast between negative and positive is also a binary. Right? It is both negative and positive, yet at the same time difference is neither positive nor negative. Right? So it's a strange word. It's a non-word almost. A word which is non-word. Right? So it's a very difficult idea to grasp. However, that actually, if you follow that line, you can be able to deal with very complex text in Derrida if you get what Derrida is hinting at. So that's very important term to understand. Yeah. So what was the other question that you were asking?
You can elaborate more with some examples. This, and is there any link with this idea of phonocentrism and logocentrism that comes within this way?
Yeah. As I said earlier, phonocentrism is the tendency in the Western thought to privilege speech over writing. And that happens because speech is considered as presence. I am speaking and you are listening and we are in front of each other. We are present. I am present to you. But when you write, the reader and the writer are not present to each other. When students write answers, the examiner is not present. And when examiner reads it, the student is not present. So writing is almost a practice of absence, while speaking is practice of presence. So in Western philosophy, there is a bias towards speaking. That what is language? Language is speaking. Now this bias is known as phonocentrism, and that is a manifestation, a symptom of logocentric thinking. And what difference does is that it causes this. It is a condition which causes the difference between speaking and writing, presence and absence. Right? We are able to distinguish between presence and absence because of difference. But at the same time, there is no ultimate meaning to it. So what happens is that the other term can also be considered as primary. For example, what he does in his first book called Of Grammatology is considers writing as primary and speaking as secondary. So he sees speaking as something that comes, that is derivative, and writing is what language really is. Right? So he shows that writing can be considered primary. Right? So he's questioning this logocentrism using the idea of difference.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Sachin. After reading 5.1, the problem of defining deconstruction, I have several doubts. Say, for instance, why is it difficult to define deconstruction? Secondly, the question comes is like, why is it not a negative term? And the third point is like, how does deconstruction happen on its own? I would request you to elaborate a bit on this.
Thank you, Dilip. It's a very pertinent and important question, and often students are at loss when they try to grapple with the definition of term deconstruction. One very important question which Derrida is asking throughout his entire career is whether it is possible to define something once and for all, rigorously, and whether and what are its limits. To what extent can you define something? So that becomes a kind of basic question which Derrida is asking. And keeping that in mind, the term that he uses, deconstruction, he refuses to define it, saying that like all other terms that we use in philosophy or literary criticism for that matter, even deconstruction cannot be once and for all finally defined. Right? And students and scholars often want something that is clear cut and defined for their use. And so Derrida becomes very difficult philosopher to read. So that is one reason why deconstruction is a very difficult idea to define.
So why is it a negative term? Why is it exactly not a negative term?
Right. Because Derrida says that it's not a destructive activity. It's not something breaking down something for sake of destruction. But what Derrida is doing is inquiring into the condition or what causes a philosophical system to stand up on its feet and fall down. So what are the conditions which make a philosophical or intellectual system possible? So he is inquiring into the foundations and is also inquiring into the condition of why something cannot be defined.
Can be defined.
Or a system cannot be finally closed off. So he says that the deconstruction is not a destructive activity but an inquiry into the foundations, causes of intellectual systems.
Fine.
So that is one reason why it's not a negative operation. But there is also the point that he makes, that he wants to transform the way people think.
Okay.
Right, so entire structure of Western thought has to be transformed, is what Derrida wants to emphasize, and he takes this from Heidegger's project of destruction, which he wants to translate into French from German. And that is what he is explaining in the famous letter to a Japanese friend. His Japanese friend was a professor who wanted to translate French text of Derrida into Japanese.
Okay, fine.
And so he wants to know how to translate deconstruction.
Yes, and that is what we are going to read in the next subsection of the same unit.
Right.
So the point that comes is like, how does deconstruction happen on its own?
Right. So once you consider that it's not a destruction, but an inquiry into the limits of a philosophical system, its coherence, then we see that the conditions which produce a philosophical system are the same conditions which are putting a limit to it. Now all this is very abstract, and that is one reason why students will have great difficulty in understanding this. But the very condition, Derrida argues, which produces an intellectual system which is based on distinctions or binary oppositions, as we will see in our next units, is the same condition is responsible for undoing those oppositions. Right, and the term that he uses for this condition is difference, as we speak in French. But it is not spelled. It's not spelled differently in French, but in English, you have to show the difference. Right. So we'll look into that when we look into the unit of difference.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, so the talk on difference was really interesting one, and it made the point clear that what is the difference between the difference, the audible and the written form of the word. While reading 5.4, structure, sign and play, I got struck at this sentence. I quote, "Language bears within itself the necessity of its own critic." I unquote. What exactly Derrida wanted to convey by this?
Right. It's a very fascinating statement, and that sums up what actually deconstruction is all about. And the essay that we are discussing here, Structure, Sign and Play, is one of the very important documents of contemporary literary theory, as it inaugurates what is known as post-structuralism in 1967. By post-structuralism, we mean not outright rejection or criticism of structuralism, but going beyond by critiquing structuralism. So the essay is actually a critique of Levi-Strauss, and a very famous anthropologist who made structuralism very popular. The statement that you say, that the language bears within itself necessity of its own critique, actually sums up the inquiry of deconstruction. What he implies here is that structuralism, when it began as a criticism or attack on metaphysics on one hand and science on another. Science was the predominant way of getting knowledge in the West. Structuralism began as a critique of the assumptions of science as well as metaphysics. Right. But what Derrida is questioning, that how come then that Levi-Strauss is using the same assumptions that you find in metaphysics and science in his own practice of structuralism. So what seems to be happening, that on one hand structuralism is a criticism of science and metaphysics. On the other hand, it uses the same assumptions. And he talks about similar cases that have happened in the past. For example, how Nietzsche criticizes the earlier tradition of Western philosophy, and then Heidegger says that Nietzsche is the last metaphysician. Right? And then how Derrida actually critiques Heidegger, saying that Heidegger is the last metaphysician. So what is happening is the criticism that is being levied against tradition uses the same assumption that tradition is using. So what happens is that criticism can never go outside of tradition. It has to work within the inherited legacy of that tradition. And that happens because Derrida says it's because of the language. Because language contains all the assumptions coded into it. And as we saw in our discussion on difference, that the ultimate final meaning can never be grasped. It can only be promised and deferred. So what happens that whenever you make a philosophical statement, the ultimate meaning is already postponed. It's never there for you to take. So what happens that difference makes ultimate interpretation or finality impossible. So what happens that when a philosopher sets out to critique another system, he is using the same language. And when you are using the same language, you are using the same ideas and assumptions. And that is why he says that structuralism falls prey to what it wants to prey upon. That is science and metaphysics. So similar case you might think of, say for example in Buddhism, which sets out as a critique of Vedanta. Right? Actually ends up sounding more like Vedanta. Right? So whenever you start critiquing something, you start resembling that thing which you set out to attack. And why this happens according to Derrida is because of the language. Because in language there is always this lack. Because the ultimate meaning is always deferred, postponed. You can never catch that final meaning. And because there is this something missing always in language, the language demands critique. So any philosophical statement will always contain a blind spot which asks for a criticism. And that applies as much to deconstruction also. So deconstruction also falls prey to metaphysics, as Derrida says, and that's why deconstructive writing are most of the time autocritical. It questions itself ongoingly. Because when you question Western tradition, you are also questioning yourself. So it's self-critique, autocritique that it happens. So that is what the term, the statement implies.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for explaining.
Thank you.